Okay, we got a '01 Dodge Ram. Oh no, this is a '99 Dodge Ram with a 5.9 in it. I think it's a 5.9 in it. Oh, 5.2. It's 318. Okay, it's 318. And the complaint is that it runs rough once in a while. We got the scope set up here, and actually it came in here as a no start. And after a little bit of cranking, it did finally fire, and then it ran rough for a while. So I hooked up the scope to it to see what was exactly going on. I got my low amp probe around the coil wire here, and I got back probes on the crank sensor and on the cam sensor. And on the scope here, the green line will be the cam sensor, the blue line will be the crank sensor, and then the yellow line here will be the current ramp from the coil. And as of right now, this thing's actually running pretty smooth. So what we'll do here is we'll start it up and see if I can recreate the rough running. Okay, she's running pretty smooth right now. If we take a look here, you see our crank signal, our cam signal, which is, we'll have, our crank signal ain't much here. It's only probably less than a millisecond long for each signal. Our cam signal is a little bit longer, and we can see we're getting a nice even rise out of the coil. We'll change the sweep time here. We're at 50. We'll go to 200. And we see our coil's looking good all the way through. No problems here. We'll go back to 50 millisecond screen. And we'll see if we can recreate the problem here. What I do is I'll put my arm back here and give the crank sensor a little tug. See what happens. And we can see she died. So we probably got a bad or a crank sensor that's probably got the magnet loose inside. We just tap on it a little bit back there and we start getting some misfires and stuff. And I stopped the scope here. Let's see if I can drag this back. And there's our signal. We're still getting good crank signal here. We'll move it ahead a little bit. And we can see we're starting to, right there we dropped out. We're going to drop out on the crank signal. There's another one. And we'll just, there we go. And what you'll notice will happen is when you lose the crank signal, you'll lose your spark, basically. Every time if you go through here, every time there's a miss in the crank signal, you'll see there's a miss in the spark. And worse than that, it's not even just a miss in the spark. What will happen is the ECM will fire the coil, or will short the coil to load it up, and then you get this extra long space here where your coil, normally you're drawing about 6 amps. She goes right off the charts here, because not only does it not fire the coil, it doesn't know when to turn off the coil or load up the coil. It doesn't know exactly when to fire it too, so it'll leave it open too long. And you can see the difference between the peak here and the peak here, both in length of time. It's normally probably about 4 to 5 millisecond dwell time on the coil, and we went all the way up here to probably close to 15 milliseconds right there. So if you got one that's running rough, one of these, or even if it's intermittent, just reach back there and tap on the crank sensor or wiggle the wire or whatever, and if you got the scope set up like this, you'll see that when you're starting to miss out on the crank signal, your coil will start to do some strange things there, and eventually it loses enough of the crank signal where the engine just finally dies and just leaves the coil shorted out. So I guess that's about it. It was kind of frustrating because for a while there I couldn't replicate what was running rough. It all of a sudden took off and started running on its own okay. I already had some screenshots of it running rough, and you could see that we were losing the crank signal, and it wasn't this bad. It wouldn't stall. It would just keep running just keep chugging along, misfiring, and your vacuum was going up and down. But I think the first thing to look at one of these is the crank signal. And if the crank sensor is okay, then probably go back there with a scope, or maybe take the cover off the flywheel and check the flywheel to make sure that there's no cracks in the exciter ring, because that's been another problem with these engines. So I guess that's about it.